General Vorthik of the Therian Empire dragged his massive frame through the gleaming corridors of the Galactic War Council station. Each step sent waves of pain through his battle-scarred body. His 6 arms, once capable of wielding multiple plasma weapons simultaneously, now trembled from old wounds that refused to heal properly. The towering reptilian warrior stood nearly 12 feet tall, his dark green scales bearing the marks of countless battles across 50 star systems. But today would be different. Today, he wasn't here to plan another military campaign or discuss territorial expansion. Today, he had to relive the most terrifying experience of his 4-decade military career. The council chamber doors hissed open, revealing the massive circular room where representatives from 12 of the galaxy's most powerful military species had gathered. At the center sat the high command table, occupied by beings that had conquered entire sectors of space. The insectoid Zephyrians clicked their mandibles impatiently. The crystalline Vorticans hummed with electromagnetic energy. The gaseous Nebulons shifted their forms restlessly in their containment suits. All eyes turned to Vorthik as he entered. His reputation preceded him, the Butcher of Andromeda, the Conqueror of the Outer Rim, the warrior who had never lost a campaign until 3 years ago. The silence in the room was deafening. General Vorthik spoke Councillor Prexon, the Zephyrian representative whose compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights like 1,000 tiny mirrors. We have called you here today to discuss the humans' application for a membership in our alliance. Your military assessment will determine whether we accept these newcomers as allies or classify them as a potential threat. Vorthik approached the witness stand, his claws clicking against the metal floor with each step. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed star maps of human territory, a small cluster of systems, barely visible against the vast expanse of galactic civilization. The irony wasn't lost on him. These tiny dots on the map had nearly brought the mighty Therian Empire to its knees. Honored Council, Vorthik began, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who had barked orders across 1,000 battlefields. You ask me to speak of humanity's combat effectiveness. Before I begin, I must warn you. What I am about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about warfare. Several council members exchanged glances. The Vortican representative, Christarch Velmuth, pulsed with skeptical energy. General, our intelligence reports indicate that humans achieved faster than light travel only 15 years ago. Their technology is primitive compared to us. Their ships are smaller, their weapons less advanced, their population a mere fraction of any major galactic power. Surely you're not suggesting these newcomers pose a significant threat? A harsh laugh escaped Vorthik's throat, causing several representatives to flinch. That's exactly what we thought. Christarch, that's exactly what cost us the Proxima sector and nearly our entire Third Fleet. The room fell silent again. The Therian Third Fleet had been legendary. 300 vessels of the line, including their newest dreadnoughts. It had been the pride of their military, commanded by Admiral Gorthel himself. I must tell you about Captain Litaimin and Commander Park So-Young, Vorthik continued, his voice growing distant as memories flooded back. These 2 humans taught an entire galaxy what true warfare means, not the sanitized, honor-bound combat we practice, but war in its purest, most terrifying form. He paused, looking round the chamber at faces that had never known true defeat. The human-Therian conflict began 3 years ago, when we claimed the Proxima mining colonies. Standard expansion protocol. Move in, establish dominance, absorb any resistance. We had done it successfully across 47 systems. Proxima should have been number 48. Vorthik's claws scraped against the podium as his grip tightened. We detected human settlements on 3 worlds. Primitive mining operations, small defense stations, maybe 50,000 colonists total. Our invasion force consisted of 60 capital ships and 200,000 elite Therian marines. By every military calculation, they should have surrendered the moment we entered the system. Instead, they sent us a message. Vorthok's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. A single transmission from Captain Litaimin, commander of their pathetic defense fleet of 12 vessels. Do you know what he said to our admiral when offered terms of surrender? The council waited in tense silence. He said, "We didn't come this far just to come this far. If you want our worlds, you'll have to pry them from our cold." Dead hands, Vorthok's scales darkened with the memory. And then he did something that defied all military logic. He attacked. The Nebulonian representative, Ambassador Fluxar, rippled with confusion. 12 vessels against 60. That's not warfare. That's suicide. That's what we thought too. Vorthok replied grimly. We were catastrophically wrong. What happened next would haunt the nightmares of every Therian warrior who survived to tell the tale. The holographic display behind Vorthok flickered to life, showing the Kepler station floating in the void of space like a metallic flower. The mining station wasn't much to look at, just a collection of industrial modules connected by transport tubes surrounded by asteroid processing facilities. But this unremarkable outpost would become the site of the most shocking military defeat in Therian history. Our first engagement was at the Kepler station. Vorthok continued, his voice growing darker as painful memories surfaced. Fleet Commander Kang Dongwook led their defense with only 12 vessels against our battle group of 60. These weren't even proper warships. Most were converted cargo haulers and mining vessels with weapons bolted onto their hulls. The council members studied the tactical display showing the massive size difference between the fleets. The Therian vessels were sleek predators of space, each one bristling with plasma cannons and torpedo tubes. The human ships looked like flying scrapyards in comparison. By all tactical assessments, they should have surrendered immediately. Vorthok said, his 6 arms gesturing at the display. Our Admiral Corthel opened communications and offered them standard terms: surrender and face relocation, or resist and face annihilation. We expected them to see reason. The alien general's eyes grew distant as he recalled the memory. Instead, Commander Kang did something that no military academy in the galaxy teaches. Something so insane that our tactical computers couldn't even calculate the probability of success. Vorthok activated the battle simulation, and the council watched in stunned silence as the events unfolded. The human flagship, a converted mining vessel called the Soul's Pride, suddenly broke formation and accelerated directly toward the Therian command ship. He rammed his flagship directly into our command vessel while broadcasting a single message. Across all frequencies, Vorthok's voice cracked with emotion. You want our home. Come and take it. The simulation showed the collision in brutal detail. The Soul's Pride, barely a tenth the size of the Therian dreadnought, struck the larger vessel at full speed. The explosion was massive. Both ships disappeared in a ball of superheated plasma that lit up the entire battlefield. Commander Kang turned his ship into a guided missile. Vorthok explained, his scales turning pale. He sacrificed himself and his crew of 300 to take out our command ship and Admiral Corthel. In one move, he eliminated our fleet coordination and our most experienced commander. The Zephyrian representative, Chancellor Praxone, clicked his mandibles in disbelief. But that's military suicide. No rational commander would make such a trade. That's what we thought too. Vorthok replied grimly. We assumed the humans would surrender once they saw their leader die. The explosion disabled half our fleet. Our communication rays were fried. Our formation was in chaos. We expected the remaining human ships to retreat or surrender. The general paused, his claws scraping against the podium. What happened next defied all military logic. The remaining human ships didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They attacked. The tactical display showed the aftermath of the collision. 11 human vessels, most of them damaged, began moving in coordinated patterns round the confused Therian fleet. Their movements were erratic, unpredictable. Like a pack of space wolves circling wounded prey, Lieutenant Kim Mensu took command of the human fleet. Vorthok continued, a 25-year-old mining engineer who had never commanded anything larger than a cargo shuttle. While our ships were still trying to re-establish communications, she was analyzing our weapon signatures. During combat, the simulation zoomed in on one of the human vessels, the Bison Runner, a converted cargo hauler barely larger than a Therian fighter. It was weaving between the massive alien ships, somehow avoiding their plasma cannons, or plasma weapons. Have a 3-second charging cycle between shots, Vorthok explained. It's a minor tactical detail that most enemies never notice because they're usually dead before it matters. But Lieutenant Kim figured out our firing patterns within minutes. The Council watched as the small human ship suddenly changed course, diving under a Therian cruiser just as its weapons fired. The plasma bolts streaked harmlessly through empty space while the human vessel raked the cruiser's belly with mining lasers. She started exploiting the gaps in our firing sequence, Vorthok said, his voice filled with grudging admiration. The humans coordinated their attacks to hit us during our weapon recharge cycles. They turned our superior firepower into a liability. The battle simulation showed the impossible happening. One by one, the massive Therian ships were being picked apart by the tiny human vessels. The aliens' heavy weapons couldn't track the fast-moving targets, while the humans' improvised weapons found weak spots in shields and armor. Within hours, they had turned our numerical advantage against us. Vorthok continued. They used our own weapons' recharge delays to coordinate devastating hit-and-run attacks every time we fired. They knew exactly when we'd be vulnerable. Every time we tried to reform our battle line, they scattered like space dust and regrouped somewhere else. The crystalline representative, Christarch-Velmuth, pulsed with confused energy. But how could primitive mining equipment penetrate Therian armor? Vorthok's laugh was bitter. They didn't try to penetrate it. They bypassed it. Mining lasers are designed to cut through asteroids by finding weak points in the rock. These humans used the same techniques on our ships: targeting sensor, rays, weapon mounts, engine exhausts. They carved us up piece by piece. The simulation showed the final moments of the battle. The surviving Therian ships, their formation shattered and their command structure broken, were retreating from the battlefield. Behind them, the 11 human vessels continued their deli dance. Harassing the withdrawal and picking off stragglers, we retreated from what should have been an easy victory, Vorthok admitted, his voice heavy with shame. 60 ships fled from 11, the mighty Therian fleet, conquerors of worlds. Beaten by a handful of converted cargo haulers and mining vessels, the council chamber was silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. The representatives stared at the tactical display, trying to comprehend what they had witnessed. But that was just the beginning, Vorthok said quietly. That was the day we learned that humans don't fight like any other species in the galaxy. They don't follow the rules of civilized warfare. They fight like cornered animals, with desperation, creativity, and a complete disregard for their own survival. The holographic display shifted to show New Sol, a sprawling human colony city built into the side of a massive crater on Proxima 4. The city looked peaceful from orbit, white buildings cascading down terrace levels, green parks scattered throughout, transport tubes connecting different districts. It housed nearly 2 million civilians, making it the largest human settlement in the Proxima system. The real horror began during the siege. "I've no soul." Vorthok's voice dropped too, barely above a whisper, causing several council members to lean closer. After our defeat at Kepler Station, High Command was furious. They sent the Second Army, 50,000 elite Therian shock troops, supported by orbital bombardment platforms and atmospheric fighters. The display zoomed into show. Bavarian landing forces descending like metallic rain. Massive dropships disgorged thousands of heavily armored soldiers while fighter craft screamed overhead, their plasma cannons lighting up the sky. Colonel Choi Hyun-woo commanded the defense with just 5,000 Marines. Vorthok continued. Most weren't even proper soldiers. They were police officers, security guards, and civilian volunteers who had picked up weapons when the invasion began. We expected to take the city in 3 days. The alien general's scales darkened as he recalled the memory. We were wrong, catastrophically wrong. The simulation showed the first wave of Therian troops advancing through the city's outer districts. Their powered armor gleamed in the artificial sunlight as they moved in perfect formation, plasma rifles at the ready. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Then the explosion started. The humans had turned the entire city into a trap. Vorthok explained as the display showed buildings collapsing, streets erupting in flames, and hidden weapons emerging from seemingly innocent locations. Every manhole cover hid explosives. Every window could become a sniper's nest. Every civilian structure was a potential fortress. The council watched in amazement as the orderly Therian advance dissolved into chaos. Soldiers were disappearing into hidden pit traps, being picked off by snipers firing from impossible angles and finding themselves cut off as human defenders sealed tunnels and collapsed overpasses behind them. But humans fight differently than any species we've encountered, Vorthok said, his voice filled with grudging respect. They don't hold territory. They flow around it like water. When we took a building, they would abandon it and attack from 3 others. When we secured a street, they would emerge from the sewers behind us. The display focused on a particular section of the city's underground, in the dark tunnels beneath Nusol. A small group of human soldiers moved like ghosts through the maintenance passages. Their leader was a compact woman with short black hair and eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. Sergeant Yoon Da-yoon led a squad that lived in the city's sewers for 2 months. Vorthok continued. 12 soldiers who became legends among our troops. They called themselves the Tunnel Rats. And they turned the underground into their personal hunting ground. The simulation showed the Tunnel Rats in action. They would emerge from storm drains to attack supply convoys, disappear back underground before reinforcements could arrive, then pop up miles away to hit another target. Their hit-and-run tactics were devastating to Therian morale. They lived on recycled water and emergency rations, Vorthok said. They slept in maintenance tunnels filled with toxic gases that would kill most species in minutes. They moved through spaces so cramped that our soldiers couldn't follow even if they wanted to. And somehow, they kept fighting. The display showed one particularly brutal ambush. A Therian supply convoy was moving through what appeared to be a secure tunnel when the walls literally exploded. Human soldiers poured out of hidden passages, their mining lasers cutting through Therian armor like paper. The entire attack lasted less than 30 seconds before the humans vanished back into the darkness. They turned the urban environment into a weapon. Vorthok explained. Every building became a fortress, every street a killing field. They rigged civilian structures with explosives, turned water mains into improvised weapons, and somehow convinced the city's automated systems to fight against us. The council members leaned forward as Vorthik continued with the most disturbing part of his testimony. Captain Shin Bo-young's unit captured our advanced plasma rifles during one of these raids. Standard protocol would be to study the weapons, send them back to command for analysis, maybe reverse engineer them over several months. The display showed a makeshift workshop in an abandoned factory. Human engineers were taking apart Therian weapons with tools that looked like they belonged in a kitchen rather than a military laboratory. Within days, they had reverse-engineered portable versions, Vorthik said, his voice filled with disbelief. While our scientists needed months to adapt alien technology, humans did it in their sleep. Captain Shin's team was using our own plasma technology against us before the first week was over. The simulation showed human soldiers carrying weapons that looked like strange hybrids, Therian plasma cores mounted on human frames, mining equipment modified with alien targeting systems. Civilian tools transformed into military hardware. They modified civilian equipment into military hardware with frightening creativity. Vorthik continued. Construction mechs became mobile artillery platforms. Food processing lasers became precision sniper weapons. Even their children's toys were turned into surveillance drones that could slip past our sensors. The display showed the most disturbing sight of all: human defenders eating their emergency rations while maintaining their weapons. The rations looked like grey paste that would be toxic to most galactic species. They somehow maintained morale while eating rations that would poison most species, Vorthik said. Our biological warfare experts confirmed that human emergency food would cause organ failure in Therian physiology within hours. Yet these humans consumed it daily and kept fighting. But the worst revelation was yet to come. The display shifted to show Therian troops in their barracks, their expressions haunted and fearful. Many were staring at nothing, their weapons trembling in their claws. But the worst part was Major Han Jae-sung's psychological warfare. Vorthik's voice became barely audible. This human officer did something our military psychologist said was impossible. He learned our language perfectly within weeks, studied our culture from captured databases, and began broadcasting messages that exploited our deepest fears. The council heard a recording of one of these broadcasts, a human voice speaking perfect Therian, describing in detail how the humans would hunt down every invader, how they would turn the planet itself against the occupation forces, how they would never stop fighting until every alien was dead or gone. Major Han somehow learned that Therian warriors fear being forgotten after death, Vorthik explained. He began broadcasting the names of our dead soldiers, describing how they died, alone and afraid, how their bodies would rot on this alien world while their families never learned their fate. The psychological impact was devastating. The display showed Therian soldiers breaking down, refusing orders, some even deserting their positions to hide in the outer districts. Our troops started having nightmares about humans who fought like demons, Vorthik continued. They dreamed of human soldiers who refused to die, who kept fighting even after taking wounds that should have been fatal. They spoke of humans who could appear anywhere, strike from any direction, and vanish like smoke. The alien general paused, his 6 arms trembling as he recalled those dark days. We began losing soldiers not to enemy fire, but to fear, hardened. Veterans who had conquered worlds were breaking down because they couldn't understand an enemy that fought with such desperate creativity. The siege lasted 8 months, Vorthik concluded grimly. 8 months of fighting an enemy that turned every disadvantage into a tactical advantage, that adapted faster than we could react, that simply refused to accept defeat no matter how hopeless their situation became. The council chamber was silent except for the hum of life support systems as the representatives tried to process what they had heard, and that, Vorthik said quietly, was when we learned that humans don't just fight wars, they become war itself. The holographic display flickered and transformed, showing a massive asteroid spinning slowly in the void of space. Titan base clung to its surface like a metallic parasite, its mining equipment and processing facilities spreading across the rocky terrain in a web of tunnels and towers. The asteroid was rich in rare minerals that both humans and Therians desperately needed for their war machines. Vorthok's testimony reached its climax as his voice cracked with remembered trauma. The battle-scarred General's 6 arms shook uncontrollably as he stared at the display, reliving his worst nightmare. The Battle of Titan Base lasted 14 months, he began, his words barely audible in the silent council chamber. 14 months of the most brutal fighting I have ever witnessed. Captain Lee Eugen held the mining facility with 800 defenders against our siege force of 12,000 elite Therian assault troops. The display zoomed in to show the human defenders taking positions throughout the asteroid facility. They looked exhausted even before the battle began. Their uniforms were patched and worn. Their equipment was a mix of military gear and improvised weapons. Many of them were barely adults, their faces showing the strain of months of constant warfare. The facility should have fallen in days. Vorthok continued, his scales darkening with shame. We had overwhelming numbers, superior firepower, and complete control of the space around the asteroid. Our battle plan was simple: land our forces, overwhelm the defenders, and secure the mining equipment intact. The simulation showed the initial Therian assault. Hundreds of drop pods rained down on the asteroid's surface while gunships provided covering fire. The aliens moved with military precision, their powered armor gleaming under the harsh light of the system's twin suns. But something was wrong. As the Therian forces advanced toward the main facility, the asteroid itself seemed to come alive. Instead, these humans turned the asteroid itself into a fortress, Vorthok said, his voice filled with disbelief even after all these years. Engineer Kim Sora had rigged the entire mining operation to work against us. What we thought were simple industrial facilities became death traps. The display showed the horror that followed. Mining lasers that should have been cutting through rock suddenly swiveled to target Therian troops. Conveyor belts designed to move ore became moving barriers that crushed anything in their path. Even the gravity wells used to collect minerals were weaponized, creating invisible traps that sent soldiers tumbling into the asteroid's core. They used the low gravity to their advantage. Vorthok explained as the simulation showed human defenders leaping incredible distances, bouncing off walls and ceilings like deadly acrobats. We were trained for ground combat on standard worlds, but in low gravity, the humans fought in 3 dimensions while we were still thinking in 2. The council watched in amazement as human soldiers used the asteroid's spinning motion to slingshot themselves round corners, attack from impossible angles, and disappear into maintenance shafts that were too small for Therian warriors to follow. Their movement was like a deadly dance, graceful and terrifying at the same time. When we cut their supply lines, we expected them to surrender within days. Vorthok continued, no army can fight without ammunition, food, or replacement equipment. But these humans did something that our strategists said was impossible. The display showed human workers in the asteroid's deep mines, using the very equipment they were fighting to defend. They were melting down raw ore and somehow turning it into weapons and ammunition. They began manufacturing weapons from asteroid ore, Vorthok said, his voice filled with grudging admiration. Using mining equipment, they created bullets, explosives, even crude plasma charges. They turned their prison into an armory and kept fighting with weapons made from the rocks beneath their feet. The siege dragged on for months. The display showed Therian forces becoming increasingly desperate and demoralized as their supposedly easy victory turned into a grinding war of attrition. Human defenders continued to hold key positions despite being outnumbered 15-1. But the breaking point came during the 13th month. Vorthik's voice dropped to a whisper. Commander Park Woo Bin led a 17-man strike team on what we thought was a desperate escape attempt. Our sensors detected them approaching our command ship, and we prepared to capture them alive for interrogation. The simulation showed the small human shuttle approaching the massive Therian flagship, the Alien. Vessel was a kilometer long, bristling with weapons and armor. The tiny human craft looked like an insect approaching a sleeping giant. They didn't try to capture it. Vorthik continued, his scales going pale at the memory. They docked with our ship and fought their way to the reactor core. We thought they were trying to disable our engines or steal our technology. We were wrong. The Council watched in horror as the simulation showed the human strike team battling through the ship's corridors. They moved with desperate determination, taking terrible casualties but never stopping their advance toward the ship's heart. Commander Park's team reached the reactor room and barricaded themselves inside. Vorthik said, when our security forces finally broke through, they found the humans had rigged a fusion charge to the main reactor. They had maybe 30 seconds before the explosion would destroy the entire ship. The alien general paused, his voice breaking with emotion. Do you know what they did in those final moments? They sang. They broadcast their death song across all frequencies so that every human defend on the asteroid could hear them. 17 humans died to eliminate our flagship and 2,000 Therian warriors. The simulation showed the massive explosion as the Therian command ship disappeared in a ball of nuclear fire. The blast was so bright it could be seen from the planet's surface, and the electromagnetic pulse disabled every electronic system within 1,000 kilometers. That was when our veterans began to break. Vorthik admitted, his voice barely audible. Warriors who had conquered entire systems started refusing orders. They couldn't understand an enemy that viewed certain death as an acceptable tactical option. How do you fight someone who considers suicide a valid military strategy? The display showed Therian soldiers in their barracks, their expressions hunted and fearful. Some were staring at nothing, their weapons forgotten. Others were writing final messages to their families, convinced they would never leave this cursed asteroid alive. The final assault came 2 weeks later. Vorthik continued. We threw everything we had at the main facility, our remaining ships, our best troops, our most advanced weapons. We breached the outer defenses and fought our way into the complex itself. The simulation showed the brutal close-quarters combat. In the facility's narrow corridors, Therian troops in powered armor faced human defenders armed with improvised weapons and desperate courage. The fighting was savage and personal, with no quarter asked or given. Private Jung Dahai held Corridor 7 alone for 6 hours against waves of our elite troops. Vorthik said, his voice filled with amazement. One human soldier, armed with nothing but a mining laser and pure determination, stopped an entire company of Therian warriors. She was maybe 20 years old, barely 5 feet tall, and she fought like a demon. The display showed the young human woman taking position behind a makeshift barricade. Wave after wave of alien soldiers charged down the corridor, only to be cut down by her precise laser fire. Bodies piled up in front of her position, but she never retreated, never faltered. When we finally overwhelmed her position with sheer numbers, she looked up at us and smiled. Vorthik's voice cracked. She actually smiled as she activated a grenade that killed herself and 17 of our best soldiers. Her last words were, "See you in hell, you ugly bastards." The council chamber was dead silent as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't just fought a military campaign. They had waged total war with a species that viewed death as preferable to defeat. That was the moment I knew we had lost. Vorthik concluded. Not because we couldn't take the asteroid. We eventually did. But because we finally understood what we were fighting. These weren't soldiers defending a military position. They were a species fighting for survival. And they would rather die than surrender their future to alien conquest. The holographic display faded to black, leaving the council in darkness with only the weight of Vorthik's words. We took Titan Base, the general said quietly. But it cost us everything. And the humans, they just kept fighting. The holographic display dimmed as Vorthik prepared to deliver the most shocking revelation of his testimony. His 6 arms trembled, not from old wounds, but from the memory of what he had discovered on Earth. The council members sat in tense silence, sensing that the worst was yet to come. In the final moments of his testimony, Vorthik revealed the most disturbing truth of all. He began, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible knowledge. When the ceasefire was finally declared after 18 months of brutal warfare, I demanded to meet with their supreme commander. I needed to understand how we had been defeated by what we thought was a primitive species. The display shifted to show a blue-green world hanging in space like a jewel, overlooked, peaceful from orbit, with its white clouds and vast oceans. But Vorthik knew better now. This beautiful world had produced the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. General Seojon received me at their military headquarters in Seoul. Vorthik continued. He was a small man by Therian standards, barely reaching my lowest shoulder. But his eyes held the same deadly calm I had seen in every human soldier we fought. When I asked him how his people had defeated us, he smiled and said, "You want to know? I'll show you." The simulation showed Vorthik's shuttle landing at a massive military complex. Human soldiers in pristine uniforms lined the landing pad, their discipline evident in every movement. But these weren't the ragged defenders he had fought in the colonies. These were professional warriors who had never tasted defeat. The first thing General O told me shattered everything I thought I knew about the war. Vorthik said, his voice breaking, "The forces we fought, Captain Lee Tae-min, Colonel Choi Han-woo, Sergeant Yoon Do-yoon, and all the others, they weren't even humanity's primary military. They were colonial defense forces, miners and civilian volunteers hastily trained for combat." The council members exchanged shocked glances. The humans who had nearly destroyed the Therian Empire weren't even real soldiers. Earth's actual military had been engaged in simultaneous conflicts with 3 other species. Vorthik continued. While we were fighting what we thought was their best, their real army was conquering the Zephyrian outer colonies, defending against a Vortaken invasion fleet, and somehow managing to hold off a Nebulonian swarm attack, all at the same time. The display showed a massive war room where human generals moved fleets across multiple star systems. Thousands of ships were engaged in battles across dozens of worlds. And Earth was winning every single conflict. General O took me to their military academies. Vorthik said, his scales going pale. I watched children like Cadet Kim Tae-young, barely 16 years old, training in combat techniques that would break the minds of our finest warriors. They were practicing urban warfare in cities filled with poisonous gas, zero-gravity combat, in spinning chambers that would disorient most species, and underwater fighting in crushing depths. The simulation showed human cadets moving through training facilities that looked like scenes from nightmares. They fought in environments that would kill most galactic species within minutes. And they did it while barely old enough to vote. These children weren't just learning to fight. Vorthik explained. They were learning to survive anywhere, under any conditions, against any enemy. They studied the biology and psychology of every known species, memorizing weaknesses and developing countermeasures. By the time they graduated, they could kill a Therian warrior with their bare hands, The display shifted to show Earth's Special Forces training. The Council watched in horror as human soldiers practiced in environments that defied imagination: underwater combat in freezing oceans, mountain warfare in crushing gravity, desert operations in temperatures that would melt most species. General O showed me their special forces, led by Major Lee Sohan. Vorthik continued. These humans routinely train in environments that would kill most galactic species. They practice combat in the crushing depths of Earth's oceans, the burning deserts of their equatorial regions, and the frozen wastelands of their polar caps. They call it Hell Week, and they do it for fun. The simulation showed Major Lee Sohan leading her team through an underwater obstacle course while wearing full combat gear. They moved like deadly sharks through the water, their movements precise and efficient even in the crushing depths. But most terrifying of all was meeting Dr. Park Min-ho, their lead weapons researcher. Vorthik's voice became barely audible. While we were fighting their colonial forces, this one human had been developing weapons designed specifically to counter every major galactic military. In 3 years, they had prepared for a war against species they had never encountered. The display showed a massive research facility where human scientists worked with alien technology. But they weren't just studying captured weapons. They were improving them, creating hybrid technologies that were more advanced than anything in the galaxy. Dr. Park showed me weapons that could penetrate Zephyrian bioarmor, energy fields that could disrupt Vortaken crystalline structures, and viral programs that could infect Nebulonian collective consciousness, Vorthik said. They had developed countermeasures from military tactics they had never seen, prepared for battles they had never fought. The council members stared in disbelief as the display showed weapon after weapon, each one designed to kill a specific galactic species. The humans had turned warfare into a science, and they were decades ahead of everyone else. General O told me something that still haunts my dreams. Vorthik continued. He said that humanity had been preparing for a galactic war since they first detected alien radio signals for over a century. They had been planning, preparing, and building weapons for conflicts that might never come. When we invaded their colonies, we weren't fighting desperate defenders. We were fighting the end result of 100 years of military preparation. The alien general paused, his 6 arms shaking with emotion. Humanity doesn't just fight to win. They fight to ensure their species' survival. They are predators from a death world who learn to turn every disadvantage into strength, every defeat into education, every loss into fuel for a victory. The display showed Earth in all its terrible beauty, the blue oceans that had taught humans to adapt, the towering mountains that had made them strong, the vast deserts that had taught them endurance. This world had forged the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They don't see war as a tool of conquest, Vorthik explained. They see it as a test of survival. Every battle teaches them something new. Every enemy shows them a new way to fight. They don't just defeat their opponents. They absorb their strengths and add them to their own. The council chambers fell into complete silence as Vorthik prepared to deliver his final warning. The weight of his words hung in the air like a physical presence. Vote to accept them as allies. Honored Council, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen the face of war itself. Do whatever it takes to ensure they stand with us rather than against us. Give them whatever they want. Agree to whatever terms they propose. Because I have seen what happens when humans go to war. The alien general stepped down from the podium, his massive frame moving with the careful dignity of a warrior who had learned respect for his enemies. His testimony was complete, but his final words echoed in the chamber. I promise you, he said quietly, the galaxy has never faced anything More terrifying than a human who has nothing left to lose. The council members sat in stunned silence as the implications of Vorthik's testimony sank in. They had been debating whether to accept humanity as junior partners in their alliance. Now, they realized they should be begging to join humanity's empire. Within hours, humanity's application for Galactic Alliance membership was approved unanimously. The vote wasn't even close. It was survival instinct disguised as diplomacy. As the council members filed out of the chamber, each one was thinking the same thing. Thank the stars that humanity wanted to be friends, because after hearing Vorthik's testimony, none of them wanted to find out what would happen if they became enemies. Asterisk the end asterisk.